Okay, we're sitting here at Best HQ, the headquarters of Mainstream Media, with Mainstream Media reporter Holly, along with Jim Marood of DNA Northwest. And we heard a presentation today, a very moving presentation about writing letters of blessing and really ways to connect with people. And Holly, just kind of give your reaction to the presentation today.
It gave me something to think about.
Something
I can maybe make amends with people I'm frustrated with.
Yeah, anyone come to mind that you need to write a letter of blessing to?
Several people.
Yeah, like who do you think? That's too personal, huh? I'll edit that out. But and Jim, why don't you talk for a minute about maybe some of the memorable letters that you've helped people write and just how this has impacted you on a personal level?
Well, probably the most memorable letter was a letter that I wrote to my own father. It's over 30 years ago. And I wrote that letter to my dad after I'd heard another man speak about the importance of doing this. And both his father and my father were alcoholic, and they said a lot of things that were very hurtful to us, and it had a very strong effect in how I thought about myself, how I felt about myself, and also some of the choices that I made. But I decided to go ahead and write that letter, and I was amazed at how many good things I wound up thinking about my dad. And it helped me actually to change the way I thought about him, even as I was writing the letter. So I sent that letter, and my dad never did respond to the letter, but there was a change in the way that he talked to me and treated me that I noticed. And then I found that letter after he died. It was in his little treasure box. So it showed me that he really did value that letter, but he just had a hard time expressing himself, especially those types of feelings. So I've helped many other people to write these kinds of letters. One was a man I mentioned in my presentation, a man named Buford. He wrote a letter to his daughter, Janet, who's now 60-some years old, but years and years ago, Janet had been in an automobile accident, and in that accident, Buford's youngest son, Ricky, was killed. And it was a very, very painful thing for everybody involved. And he'd never said anything to Janet about the accident, neither had his wife, Phyllis. And so their daughter Janet had interpreted the silence as them, number one, being very angry at her, and then two, blaming her for the death of her younger brother. So all those years, nothing was said. And so I helped Buford to write a letter to her, and in that letter he talked about Ricky, his son, talked about the day when he died, and he also said, Janet, it wasn't your fault. And he relieved her of that burden, and he blessed her. And he expressed how thankful he was for her and how much he loved her. And when she read that letter, she just cried and cried with joy. And he told me when she read that letter, she was a brand new person, because all those years, she's well into her 60s now, all those years she'd carried that burden, and she'd tried to medicate herself with prescription drugs and alcohol. She'd tried psychotherapy and hypnosis and had gone through 5 marriages, and just her life was a shambles, but nothing helped until she got that letter. And it just totally changed her. And it changed Buford too. He was so happy about that. So that's one of the real memorable letters. What a dramatic effect it had. There are many others besides, some more or less dramatic, I should say, but still, every time I've helped a person or have written a letter like this myself, there's been some blessing that has gone into it, and some way that person, both people, have been helped.
Yeah, I mean, you really change lives not only for years to come, but sometimes you can change generations that way when you change a person.
Absolutely. It stops that course of the curse that takes place in people's hearts when they're hashing and rehashing those awful things.
And Holly, as you heard today, Jim's a man that's been all over the world helping people to express their feelings. And what other kinds of things come to mind as far as something you might want to ask?
How do you think of positive things when you can only think of negative?
How do you think of positive things when you can only think of negative?
That's
Nothing positive about that person.
That's a good question. You know, I think at that point you've gone beyond what humanly is possible for you. You can only go as far as you can go. And I ask God for help. I do, and He helps me with that. He really does, and He wants me. He's to be able to think good thoughts toward other people. And so I have to recognize my own limitations, and sometimes my limitations may be very short compared to somebody else's. And maybe if I can't think of anything myself, I can ask somebody else who might think a little bit more positively about that person. So I can, kind of help me to prime the pump.
You don't have to mention any names here, but do you remember the worst thing a person ever did that you had that you helped someone write a letter for?
The worst thing. Well, with I didn't actually help him to write the letter because he wrote it himself, but Pyotr, the man I mentioned in Russia, his son had cursed him and beaten him to the point of actually breaking his leg. And Pyotr wrote a letter of blessing to him. And he'd physically beaten him. Now, I'm sure there are other, even more traumatic things that have happened to people. And I would certainly never want to minimize anybody's pain or suggest that they should do something like this. You have to be ready to do it. And, and sometimes, for me, when I finally got around to writing that letter to my dad, I dragged my feet for at least a month before I actually did it. So I can't expect, just because I come in and suggest such a thing or tell stories about this, that people are just going to go right home and do it. It may take a while. All I may be doing is cultivating their hearts and maybe sowing a little bit of seed, but it's up to the individual. It's a very personal and individual thing.
Anything else, Holly?
No.
You good?
No.
All right, thank you.